Hello, Social Leopards. Have you ever faced uncertainty in your life? Are you holding on to things out of obligation or familiarity or fear or even routine? I'm your host, Beth, here to kick off Season 4. The theme this season is reflections, and I'm here to share a story from one of the first of a small group of Substack.com connections I've made over the past year or so. Stephanie Clemons writes some really interesting and engaging stories about her life, and I've been observing her journey, reading pretty much everything she posts. Her Substack is called Stories, A Journey to Self, Peace, and Love. That title alone was what initially caught my eye and caused me to pause and take a peek into her work and into her world. Today, I'd like to share one of the stories she posted on Substack called There is Safety in Uncertainty, How I Learned to Let Go. I think it's a really good story about struggling with life transitions and lessons learned, which I can reflect on after I share this with you. I'm hopeful that you find it as impactful as I did. Are you ready? The decision to resign from my job in the spring of 2023 was a long time coming. Truthfully, I'd known for several years that it wasn't the right fit for me, and that despite the generous pay and many perks it provided, I wasn't living up to my full potential and was capable of more. More in the sense that what I was doing did not align with my real gifts and talents. Let it be said, I was great at my work, but being great at something doesn't automatically equate that it is your purpose, nor did the current developments, restructuring, and ensuing practices within my field correspond with my values, politics, and ethics. Although I was aware of all this, deeply unhappy and even ill after what seemed like an eternity of toughing it out and making the best of my situation, it took many years, much contemplation, and ultimately the impact of a life-changing event. If one is spiritually inclined, they may even perceive it as divine intervention, to finally push me to make a decision that seemed so self-evident, yet at the same time so difficult. Granted, I am still in pursuit of what I hold will lead to my professional fulfillment and navigating my way towards what I believe is meant for me, one step and day at a time. But I realized immediately after I finally called it quits that it was the most groundbreaking and intuitive decision I had ever made and possibly would ever make for myself, because for the first time in my life, I was not fearful of or anxious about the uncertainty. I was ready to embrace it. And therein lies the resolve to the question I have been posing to myself for so long, but never had a clear answer to. Why did I cling to things, places, people, relationships that I felt were not or were no longer serving me, all while knowing that letting go would provide me with a sense of relief and make me happier in the long run? Because hanging on to something that's familiar, no matter how detrimental, unhealthy, or demoralizing it might be, felt safer than facing uncertainty. At least that was the case for me. Control equals safety, safety equals control. Without going too in-depth, I can say that my childhood and youth were incredibly unstable periods in my life due to circumstances brought about by my parents and their choices. I was confronted with problems from a very early age on that I did not have the mental or emotional capacity to process in a healthy way. As I became older and upon reflection, particularly in my late teens and early 20s, this situation angered me, and I began to perceive myself as a mere victim of implications spawned by decisions and actions that I had no influence on. The thought processes that were taking precedence in my mind at this point were complicated and consuming, therefore a topic for a separate publication because including them in all their complexity here would definitely go beyond the scope of what's to be highlighted in this text, and eminently shaped the way I distinguished the way one should lead their life. They ultimately led me to developing an array of protection mechanisms to avoid ever having to be in a situation, again, where I am not safe because I am at the will of others and the consequences derived from their decisions. These protection mechanisms were based on two simple equations deduced from a logic I had created for myself, and as a result of my aforementioned ruminations. Control equals safety. Safety equals control. I essentially adopted and conformed to the belief that I can ensure that I always remain in control of what's happening in my life and in my relationships. This will guarantee me a sense of safety because I am not at the mercy of anyone or anything that I myself did not bring forth. Conversely, if I am safe, I can stay in control of situations, relationships, and circumstances because acting from a place of safety keeps you in a position of power. The main principle of the rule book I constructed and lived my life by was minimize risk at all costs. Applying this principle to my education and career ambitions meant taking the traditional route, completing school, acquiring a degree in something sensible, and attaining a secure job. A secure job, a ridiculous notion considering the times we live in now, but when I was 20, it was still believed to be a realistic goal. This, in turn, also meant no pursuing creative passions or big dreams, no wasting time on personal growth or finding yourself, not placing any emphasis on joy or fulfillment in what you choose to do to earn a living, and instead just being pragmatic. In relationships, it meant being emotionally unavailable, avoidance, and not getting attached. But again, there's a subject for an entire publication, so I'll just focus on how it's affected my career path for now. Giving up is not an option. So, I constructed a life around this fundamental maxim that I had assumed as my truth. It proved successful at first and for a while. I truly felt as I had a handle on everything and was content. But after a few years, I began to realize that something was off. My job at the time, while being well paid and allowing me a large degree of flexibility in the beginning, became more and more mundane as corporate parameters and framework conditions proceeded to fall victim to micromanagement tactics exerted by overly ambitious superiors. That was one aspect. The second factor leading me to have doubts regarding my chosen path was quite simply the boredom that was setting in. In my heart, I knew I wanted to work more freely and creatively, but I kept that aspiration buried somewhere within the depths of my soul because allowing it to surface would have rocked the boat. I was still a slave to my rules and convinced myself that a boring, secure, white-collar job was not worth sacrificing in order to chase hopes of something more fulfilling. I continued to convince myself of this even when I began to notice that the stress levels, toxic work environment, unreasonable demands, and overall feeling of this is not working anymore at my job were starting to affect my physical and mental health. I still held on to my rules, but I had to admit to myself that while I was safe, I was slowly losing control. Yet, I reasoned I could gain back control without having to give up my safety by improving my attitude and mindset. So, I got a therapist because giving up was not an option for me. At first, I believed that through therapy, I could force myself to alter my attitude towards my job situation and see it through a different lens. I actually felt somewhat guilty at the time for being dissatisfied because I was sure there were many people who would have been grateful for what I had. It felt selfish and unappreciative to even toy with the idea of quitting, giving up safety, and I sought a therapist with the intention of learning tools that could assist me in shifting towards a more positive outlook and essentially enable me to just ignore the toxicity at my workplace. But the exact opposite happened. It was through therapy and extensive self-development that I learned accepting my discontent and wanting to take pivotal action as a result is not necessarily giving up. It's letting go. And that letting go is acceptable in certain situations, even if it means facing uncertainty and leaving the safety of your comfort zone. It's okay to let go. The onset of COVID and its effects on life, as we all had known it up until then, intensified the inner turmoil I was enduring, and the insight I was gaining through my sessions was triggering even more discomfort because it wasn't correlating with the intentions I set when I made the decision to seek therapy. I believed therapy would be like a Band-Aid I could stick over my wounds so that I could carry on as I had before. But it actually ended up tearing the wounds open even wider. Healing them would require making fundamental changes to the belief systems I had been harboring and leading my life by. I had to come to terms with the fact that all the positive affirmations, deep breathing exercises, and meditation in the world would not lead to happiness in a job situation that was in stark contrast to who I was and what I really wanted. I slowly began to accept this, but I wasn't willing to let go of all that needed to be released quite yet. The toll of the situation had taken on my health was so bad at the time that I was on sick leave for several months. But therapy, along with other treatment I was receiving, had helped improve my condition to a point where I felt I could start taking action. Unfortunately, despite all my inner work in progress, I was still clinging to old notions of safety, and instead of finally doing what really needed to be done, I ignored the little voice in my head telling me to just quit and returned to my toxic workplace, albeit with reduced hours. Exactly 3 weeks after that, the divine intervention came. They say when the universe keeps dropping hints that it wants you to move, yet you ignore them, it does something to make you really uncomfortable, so you have to move. Long story short, mainly because I already discuss it at length in a prior publication, in case you're interested. I had a bad car accident on my commute to work during which I sustained horrible injuries that put me back on sick leave for another several months. More time to contemplate, more days for even deeper inner self-reflection. That was when the stuff finally hit the fan, and I started asking myself what really needed to be asked. What was I doing? Why was I wasting precious years of my life doing something I hate and not making the most of my gifts when life could be cut short at any moment and within the blink of an eye, as I had just witnessed? What's holding me back? The soul-searching I did to answer those questions, paired with the constant pain of and worry about my recovery, guided me to the decision to finally let go of everything and everyone that was not serving me and start living a life that I want to live as soon as I was back on my feet. Embracing the safety in the uncertainty. Sometimes, when you decide to let certain things, places, and people go, they don't want you to let go. It can be helpful to put some distance between yourself and what you've released, which is what I did. I left the country indefinitely to really get clear on what's next. The ironic thing is, since embarking on this journey, I've felt safer than ever before. And no, this doesn't stem from the fact that I have an endless cash flow or don't have to ever worry about income again, because that's definitely not the case. It's the sheer endlessness of possibilities that makes me feel safe. It's taken a lot of work, but I've managed to reframe my past, fearful perception of uncertainty into a more hopeful concept that primarily encompasses the idea that I may not know what the future holds, but that makes it all the easier to be open to and available for any opportunities that arise. When you're stuck in a routine, that willingness is often blocked. I am aware that we can't all just quit, but we can actively seek other employment opportunities, turn a hobby into a side hustle, take up a creative hobby to find out more about ourselves, what we're talented at, and what lights us up. Volunteer or intern within whatever time frame is doable for an organization or institution whose work aligns with what we're passionate about, etc., etc. Safety and control are mere illusions anyway. We hang on to them to protect ourselves from the uncomfortable feelings life's unpredictability invokes within us. I honestly don't believe anymore that it's possible or purposeful to build a life based on these two concepts. Everyone must decide for themselves what that means for them, though. In any case, the first steps in doing so means coming to terms with what needs to be let go of and realizing that there is safety to be had in the uncertainty you might face after you do let go. And you might even have to repeat these steps several times throughout your life because change will always be imminent. I do believe that if you can embrace this, you can experience true fulfillment. The end. What a story. There is a raw honesty in Stephanie's journey, a willingness to expose the intricacies of control, the seduction of security, and the silent cost of a life lived within carefully constructed boundaries. What echoes for me is her realization that safety is both a comfort and a cage. The rules we devise to keep chaos at bay can actually stifle the very growth and fulfillment we crave. This reminds me that letting go is not an act of giving up, but an act of trust. Trust in yourself, in the resilience to meet whatever comes, and in the wisdom that fulfillment often waits beyond the borders of our safe little worlds. Longtime listeners may remember that I have experienced similar career struggles. While I'm still working at the same corporation, I did change roles to achieve some work-life balance, and that shift changed my life immensely. I certainly wouldn't have the time or energy to produce this podcast if it weren't for that transition in my life. I realized that I was literally living to work, not enjoying real life, and I am forever grateful for taking that leap of faith. Anyway, I read this post of Stephanie's 4 times start to finish. It evoked a lot of feelings inside me. I felt less alone in my struggles. I felt more reconciled in having sought personal fulfillment. I recognized the emotions throughout that piece, and they matched my own. I think this is why I wanted to share it here. I talk to so many people who are feeling similarly, especially in the summer season of their professional careers. What seemed to be one thing early on has evolved and shifted over time. I'm not sure that early on in our professional lives we are fully aware of what our purpose and passion is. It's really common to focus on making money and climbing the corporate ladder rather than fueling what feeds our hearts and our souls. Stephanie basically inspired me to reconsider my own relationship with certainty and fear, and to wonder whether I might find a sense of safety in simply allowing life to unfold, messy, unpredictable, and full of possibility. I hope you got something out of this story as well. I also hope that you decide to visit Stephanie's Substack account and show her some appreciation. You can follow or subscribe for free. If you're not familiar with Substack.com, most accounts offer expanded content and interactive communities under totally optional paid subscriptions. I'll be sharing Stephanie's link in the show notes. Social Leopards also has a free account, and you can read our weekly blog, which is a bit of an expanded reflection on each weekly podcast episode. Next week, we are going to explore the feeling of being awestruck. A really unique reflection on how being present and finding joy in ordinary moments might be the key to positively shifting the way we view ourselves and our own personal journeys. Until then, wait a minute. I want to share one more thing. In addition to our own Substack account, Social Leopards now has a Patreon account. Just click the link in the show notes to visit. Subscribers get access to guided meditations, mini meditations, as well as affirmations, and the audio version of the weekly blog. This week, I've added affirmations specific to letting go as one example. The inventory of materials will expand every week. The show notes are gold, my friends, so be sure to check them out for all the details. Thanks so much for listening, and take care.